was a list worthy of the Generation Games conveyor belt. Motor vehicles, coffee machines, jewellery, expensive watches, and much, much more. The list of items bought by former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell exposed this week after he pled guilty to embezzlement of SNP funds. Yep, it's been quite a week in the world of Scottish politics. So what next for Mr Murrell? And what next indeed for Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP and their plans for Scottish independence? Graham Grant, you've been all over it this week. It's been a quiet one for you.
Yes, very quiet, very sedate. I think it took a lot of people by surprise, perhaps, because we had all been gearing up for a trial. And it's very difficult to know in these situations which way an accused person is going to jump. You know, it's entirely in their gift as to how they play it. So we had been preparing for a long haul, and in the end, it was fairly short and sweet, not terribly sweet for Peter Murrell. He's now in jail, of course, and is sentenced next month. There'll be various reports getting assembled about his kind of psychological profile and all the other preparations they have to make. It's like potentially he's got a long prison sentence ahead of him. There's a comparable fraud case a while ago, someone who it was a fraud of £1 million, and that was a 4-year sentence. So that gives you some indication maybe of how long. But in theory, it's there are no sentencing guidelines as such for this crime, and it is technically a life sentence. I don't think it would be, but and of course with the SNP freeing hundreds of criminals because of overcrowding, he may benefit from that in the end as well. A white collar crime, but the courts will look on it. You know, they want to make an example, someone in a position of great power and responsibility like that. It will be reflected in the sentencing.
This has been a massive story. It's not just a story that's been huge in Scotland, but nationally, internationally. And there are many reasons for that. So we'll get into the list of items, but essentially, one of the key points here is that this is money that was given by SNP supporters. It was, it wasn't public funds. It was money that belonged to the SNP and people from all sorts of walks of life, people who maybe didn't have a lot of money, were giving their hard-earned cash to this. And now we know that this has been spent by Mr. Murrell on some very odd and interesting items, some of which are extremely expensive too.
It's just an incredible list, isn't it? And I think it's the sheer variety which surprises people. You know, if you look at the list, you've got a Dyson cordless vacuum cleaner, big house jackets, and shirts, Timberland shoes, slouch pouch onesie for £75, curry sauce paste, pencil sharpener, which actually costs £110, a high-end pencil sharpener.
Done that one. I mean, that's been remarked upon. I mean, it's like, who the hell, has a pencil sharpener that costs around £100? I've even seen one that is in existence. Yeah. You're right; it's very odd. But you've been you've been quite safe with some of your choices. The nice Berghaus kit and stuff like that. The thing that's really stood out to a lot of people. Well, there's a few things. Obviously, we knew about the motorhome. I mean, that was over £100,000. But you look at things like the Lalique salt and pepper grinders. The onesie, obviously, and then the 2 watches that he bought, a few days after each other, which was very odd. Why would he need to buy 2 watches which were over £4,000 each?
Yeah, it's an odd mix from the kind of pedestrian to the luxury end, like Mont Blanc pens. Nicola Sturgeon was seen using in Parliament, very expensive pens. Up to £800, and a gold pendant Peter Murrell bought Shetland, which Nicola Sturgeon wore as well. You're right about the source of this money. The people who were parting with funds to the SNP were not rich. They hoped to further the cause of independence. They were duped. It may be that they have a legal recourse there. They could go to civil courts and sue the SNP for the money. John Swinney has said already that there isn't any money there. He was asked about compensation. He was quite firm that we don't have the money. And he actually also, the apology he gave was very equivocal and rather grudging. He said, well, if it helps, I'll say sorry to the people affected, you know. So it was a very conditional apology, which rubs salt in the wound, I think. And the courts may take a different view of that. We're now in the midst of, or potentially in the midst of this proceeds of crime procedure, which is usually used for organised crime, which aims to deprive criminals of their ill-gotten gains through the courts, stripping them of assets, confiscating the items. Maybe there's the SNP as an entity, as an organisation, is actually compensated or gets some compensation. It won't be the full amount lost. And the POCA money, the proceeds of crime money, the projects through the Scottish Government. So the Scottish Government has a fund called the Safer Communities Fund, which does things like build play parks, the public good. So, yeah, money which, that's going back into Nicola Sturgeon many times would have talked about that fund and the worth of it and proceeds of crime and so on. And now gains of her estranged husband will be ploughed into this very government-controlled fund, or a fund that presides over anyway. So, yeah, I think there must be a great, I think it's when he talked about an overwhelming betrayal, which he feels. You do wonder, in his case, obviously he says he didn't know anything about it. I mean, he was a very high profile figure. He was finance secretary in the government. A lot of people didn't seem to know very much, and you might think that's a recurring theme. It made me think of Nicola Sturgeon saying she didn't know anything about Alex Salmond's activities. Obviously, he was cleared in the criminal courts, but there were many allegations swirling around him for many years, and he admitted his own conduct to be inappropriate in court. She didn't seem to know anything about that. So, yeah, the SNP is full of people who didn't notice what was going on, curious. And of course, Sturgeon herself, Nicola Sturgeon, benefited, albeit unknowingly, she says, from her husband's crimes, because she wore items he bought or used items. She says she didn't know anything about it. But yeah, so there's a lot of incuriosity in the SNP among senior figures who say all this took them by surprise. Yeah, the donors and the supporters and the voters, the people who were hoodwinked, are victims. Swinney says the SNP is the victim. In a legal sense, he's right. But I think a lot of people, perhaps the whole country, feels a bit duped, actually, and a bit gaslit, because we were told, Sturgeon said there were no issues with the finances. There's nothing to see here. And because she was a very forceful personality, I think a lot of people were taken in by it. So there's maybe a sense of collective betrayal, actually, isn't there? It's not just a party issue. I think they want to make it out to be, this is, a relatively small group, well, not a small group, a group of donors were affected. Party was the victim, and that's it. There's a conviction that we can now move on. But I think that might be wishful thinking.
I think that's a good way to put it, actually, in that kind of collective betrayal idea, because this was going on from 2010. So it's a very, very long time. And you'd imagine that you would want to have complete faith and trust in the government that happens to be in charge throughout that time period. I mean, Miss Sturgeon has claimed that she had no knowledge or suspicion of what was going on with her former husband's thefts from the party. But the problem with all of this, and you've kind of pointed to this, is just the level of incredulity around it. People just don't believe that there could have been no suspicions raised over that entire length of time. Now, people have differing opinions on this, but this seems to be the kind of vein of thought that it's been trickling out since we found out about all of these items and the amount that was stolen from the SNP.
Yeah, it seems incredible, doesn't it, that no one knew what was going on with that. Nicola Sturgeon's defence is that they had separate bank accounts. She did not know about his financial affairs. Presumably, he didn't know much about hers by implication. She paints a picture of, to some extent, I mean, given the marriage is now over, they're still married, but they're heading towards divorce. maybe a couple living separate lives to some extent. She would have been very busy as First Minister. He had a busy job as well, busy for the wrong reasons, as we now know, but was the 80 grand a year chief executive. It's very interesting looking at the timeline that the fraud started very soon after they were married, really within days, and he was straight away, he was on Amazon and buying goods with stolen cash or partly with stolen cash, and then laying these false accounting trails. So it is something that, was it triggered by the marriage and a desire to make sure that he could satisfy her material wealth as he perceived it? He may have been entirely wrong in that, but yeah, it seems like it's almost an addiction looking at this list. And but yeah, we have Nicola Sturgeon has also hired a lawyer in Scotland for a wide variety of cases, the Sheku Bio case, maybe most notably recently. And there have been some very strong words from him reiterating her complete ignorance of what happened. What really stung them was the revelation that she didn't comment during the police interview, which is entirely her right, the right to silence. It would have been the result of legal advice to not comment. But Russell Finlay, the Conservative leader, said this is the sort of tactic that you would find gangsters using. They would be advised to not make any comment during police interviews, which really touched a nerve, I think, in Amber Anwar. Was very reject that, to reiterate her ignorance of what was going on, and to criticise Russell Finlay for, as he saw it, for questioning the right to silence, which is it's law. So it was her right to do it. But of course, she had said that she would cooperate with the inquiry fully. So, and she also put in a written statement to the police, which you assume would have resembled the statement she put out this week, I guess. It is a pretty straightforward defence, isn't it? I didn't know. But she did benefit from it. And I think reputationally, she must be very fearful of the damage this is doing. She's now on the board of trustees of a charity, a refugee charity. Building a new life, I think, must be concerned about what the public perception of her will be. Regardless of the legality of it, it must be a real source of anxiety. And as she says, it's a profound personal trauma, which is quite telling in a way that she saw it as a personal issue. Clearly it is. But like John Swinney, there maybe wasn't much sympathy for the victims, for the donors.
No, I mean, look, clearly the legal boundaries around, what we can or cannot say with regards to Ms. Sturgeon. And personally, I think it's perfectly reasonable to suggest that she had no sight of her husband's bank accounts, because in all the relationships I've ever had, I've never let my other half see my bank account. I think that's actually pretty normal. But I think one of the key areas that has, or people have asked questions around is, in particular, is the motorhome, and whether how could she possibly not know that it was parked at her mother-in-law's home in Fife. And it does make you ask further questions. And I think this is the thing. This happened a couple of days ago, but it's not going to go away, because we then start asking questions about who these things were being bought for instance. I mean, you've mentioned the nice pens and some jewellery, and she had a nice handbag that I think she was spotted with as well, that also appears to have come out of these particular funds. But if she wasn't aware of a motorhome, I mean, was Peter Murrell going on holiday by himself in a motorhome? Why did he need a motorhome if she wasn't going on holiday with him? What was the whole concept just seems very bizarre, and that's why I think it's very hard to believe that there was very little knowledge of this from many people's perceptions.
It was said at the time that this might be used for election purposes, some kind of battle bus from her. And there was even a story suggesting that they wanted it back. They wanted the police to give maybe temporary custody of during an election campaign. I think it would have been seen as a complete albatross, though, and a reminder of the investigation. It's incredible to think anyone was thinking along those lines. I think it was a very hard explanation to believe. In fact, it was parked at his mother's house in Dunfermline. Something the Scottish Mail on Sunday revealed a few years ago when it was confiscated. Um, it's quite brazen, isn't it? He wasn't making, a lot of it was brazen, though, and the fact that Sturgeon was using these pens actually in the Hollywood debating chamber
But then
and
if
the
she didn't
climate.
know, there's no reason for her to hide them, right? So
No, it's indeed, but from his point of view, you wonder what he made of it, seeing her with these luxury goods, knowing she's on the public stage at the International Climate Change Summit in Hollywood. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what he was thinking in those times. And when she was talking about poverty and inequality and child poverty, subjects that were obviously very close to her heart. And indeed, with the Mont Blanc pens, the reason that we have those images of her with the pens is because people at the time noticed, or one of Russell Finley's constituents noticed that she had a very expensive pen. But at the time, there was a row about free laptops for children, which the SNP had promised at the end, a very small fraction. And they were incensed that she was able, or apparently able, to afford these pens, and yet her child wasn't getting them. So there was coverage of that at the time. And the explanation at the time was that it was they were gifts from an unnamed relative. I think there were all kinds of warning signs for many years. The fact that the accountants quit, the accountants who were meant to be certifying the accounts, for quite late on in the process. I think it was as a result of
was that Johnson Carmichael in 23, I think.
yes. Obviously, for many years the accounts were signed off, and he laid these sort of false accounting trails, presumably quite skillfully, over many years, over 12 years. So it was a very brazen and protracted fraud. Yeah, you wonder if there was an element of addiction. I suppose once you start getting away with it. The interesting thing is as well, there was a parking ticket, a fixed penalty notice, which he paid for as well. It was quite comparatively minor things. Yeah, the psychology of fraud is a very interesting area. And we've seen it before in the SNP with Natalie McGarry, who was jailed. He was a nationalist MP, fairly pedestrian things. Important things, but basically, holidays or paying a mortgage and take away. Yeah, they were living beyond their means, and despite their collective wealth, about 10 years ago, they were in the top 2% of the income high-powered jobs. So the motivation for it is fascinating. Only he can know, really, and I suspect he'll never stay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole sort of conversation around that, again, as I said, is important because we don't know, Graham, whether he was bringing some of these items into his home. There is no evidence of that. We've seen some things, on Nicola Sturgeon, or she's had the pens, the handbag, but there's no evidence that things like the aforementioned very expensive salt and pepper grinders were actually in their house. But if they were, you would imagine that there would be some conversation around, and I think J.K. Rowling has been enjoying a bit of this on X, asking similar questions. But you would imagine questions may be asked as to how you could afford that or where these things have come from, because even if you were earning over 100 grand a year per person in a household, so over 200K a year, these items are very expensive. It's not the kind of item that, if you had the Beckham's wealth, for instance, you might not think twice about spending, 2.5 grand on a couple of salt and pepper grinders. But, actually take home pay after tax is not, given the amount of tax we pay in this country, is not as much as you might think. Certainly, does it warrant that kind of expense? So it just all feeds into much greater questions, I'd suggest.
He was, some of the money was spent on I noticed on a DVD box set of Borgen, which was Nicola's favourite show. So I suppose things like that wouldn't have raised many eyebrows. Books, he was buying very expensive books. Yeah, some of the purchases, like DVD box set of Borgen, wouldn't have raised eyebrows. But you've got to think that luxury coffee machines and Jaguars and a motorhome, assuming she knew about its existence, would have definitely or should have raised eyebrows, but didn't. And it may be testament to the nature of that relationship, that it was dysfunctional for a number of years. It does seem like it, even from what she said herself. But yes, I think Joanna Cherry talked about incuriosity. She was a remarkably incurious person, and I think that probably sums it up. It is a bizarre collection of. She can really, this is a point the police were making, only she can explain whether she knew. She says she doesn't, about the criminality. It's in her head, and it's in her gift. Only she can disclose that. Only Peter Murrell can say why he did it. And there may, of course, in the family as well, there will have been recipients of gifts potentially. They could come forward, disclose information to the police. Doesn't seem like that's happened.
Highly unlikely. So just off the back of that, then, what will happen to? So, for instance, could the handbag, the pens, if they're still in Nicola Sturgeon's, ownership, could they be recouped? Could they be taken back?
Yeah, so this could be quite a protracted process now in the courts. Proceeds of Crime Act is quite a powerful bit of legislation, and it's been around for a long time. It was a Labour creation in the early days of the evolution. It's quite draconian. It's not often used for high-profile organised crime figures who have huge wealth, and the idea is to deprive them of the profit of the crime. So what now happens is a process where the courts can grant a confiscation order. They could go after the items or the value of those items if it can be proved that they were illegally obtained. And of course, he's admitted that he did illegally obtain this enormous catalogue of. So yes, the answer is yes, and but it could be quite a protracted process. Some of these items may have been disposed of, something that was bought 10 years ago, like chain of ownership. There's all kinds of questions thrown up by the very complex cases, fraud, which is why this has taken years to conclude and cost more than £2 million to Operation Branch 4. But it's certainly a court process now, I think, rather than police raiding. Obviously, we saw the police setting up that forensics tent, those remarkable scenes, which everyone remembers. Crates of evidence being carried out of the SNP offices in Edinburgh, and that kind of thing during the criminal inquiry. It's a court-based procedure, and it's quite complicated. I'm aware. Yes, for the motorhome, it will be auctioned off. There are kind of specialist police auctions, and you do wonder if the notoriety of it will enhance its value. Normally, with these things, there's a very considerable loss. There's depreciation anyway, but you get back a small fraction. So it'll be interesting to see if anyone wants to snap up the motorhome and what condition it will be in. It's been in a police evidence yard or warehouse for years, for a few years now.
I'd quite like to see the interior.
Yes. I don't know if they've been maintaining it. I suppose they have a lot to do, the police, so they may not have been washing it every so often. Or
Sure, if someone knew that where it came from, it would go for a fair amount of money, as you say, maybe a bit of notoriety attached to it. So what happens next to Peter Murrell then? So he's got the sentencing next month, and then you said we expect him to get this sentence. In terms of everything else, I mean, is it just a case of wait and see? And the same with Miss Sturgeon. What's next for her?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon said she's rebuilding her life. She's got this charity work. Doubtless she would do more of that. Subjects that are close to her are that she's involved with a refugee charity. She's talked about writing, so she has plenty of material for a potential bestseller. She may do a new edition of her memoir, get into the detail of this, and couldn't at the time. You know, these matters were sub judice at the time. So, although it would presumably be quite a short addition to the book, because she says
No comment. 2 words.
no comment exactly. So it'd be quite a short addition. And she's talked about fiction writing. You know, her great friend Val McDermott, the crime writer. You do wonder what she makes of all this as well as a crime writer. It must be fascinating material for her. Maybe her next novel will be about fraud. I think it is difficult for her. I think this must be, she must fear it's reputationally damaging, and will probably feel great injustice. She's talked before about how the men in her life have, she's always the one who's expected to carry the can, as with Alex Salmond, who was her great mentor. She often felt she was held responsible for his actions. And the history is repeating itself from her point of view with much closer to home. So for her, it's a PR job partly as well, I think. She's no longer a politician, no longer in political level. She is a pundit, hopes to be a politician. Bet she might put that on ice for the awkward questions that might arise, although she's a very practiced performer with awkward questions. Peter Murrell is now in Saughton Jail in Edinburgh, which is a very tough prison alongside dangerous characters and, you know, people who've committed murder and serious crimes. So it will be a real wake-up call for him, special treatment. He'll be in there. He's on remand until next month at sentencing, and that will be an anxious wait for him. It will be a prison sentence. It is a white-collar crime, and of course you have to factor in things, automatic early release. If it's a sentence of less than 4 years, it's immediately cut in half. And if for a crime of this sort, they might look at a home detention curfew, which is an electronic tag. So you're let out early with a tag. So you may end up serving a fraction of the sentence. And certainly they will want to give him, yeah, initially you go to a kind of to a mainstream prison, a tough prison with white collar crime. It's a less tough regime after a relatively short amount of time. If it's a crime of this nature, a white collar crime, as they'd say, albeit a very serious one. So yeah, his life has changed utterly. And as to what he now does, I think you'll find it very difficult once he's outside, once he's finished his sentence. I don't know what you then do. He was always a very low profile figure anyway, wasn't he? He was not someone who had really much public recognition at all. You got the sense of a loner, or someone who, like very much a backroom operator. You have to depend on his family and the support. It does seem that Nicola Sturgeon does have some, you know, the bridges are still there, the channel of communication is still there. For how much longer is difficult. They're still married still. But for how much longer is the question.
Yeah, certainly no luxury items when he's in the nick, that's for sure. I can foresee a memoir coming out over the next couple of years. I mean,
Yes,
that
Jeffrey.
would presumably do quite well for him if that was an avenue he chose to pursue. It does, you know, you mentioned Nicola Sturgeon. It does. She is in quite a difficult position now because publicly she said that she's had no knowledge of this. She's in no way guilty, or she had no suspicions of any of this. So, you know, presumably that's got to align completely with whatever Mr. Morrell says if he ever chooses to speak publicly about this. So you're kind of tied into this, and I just wonder, you know, moving forward, you referenced her career as a political pundit and even as an author now. Where does that leave her? she doesn't have many opportunities when a lot of people now have very little faith in the two of them, you know?
Her legacy was fairly tarnished anyway. I think looking at the COVID, handling of COVID, and the revelations from the inquiry about her and John Swinney deleting the WhatsApps and en masse, not just them, many senior figures. But so maybe it seems to me that she has been fighting for her legacy really ever since she left office in very acrimonious circumstances. You know, she stepped down shortly before her arrest. Everyone assumed it was linked to that, although she said it wasn't. I think it's hard to believe that she didn't see what was coming down the line. She was also at the time involved in a huge row about gender recognition, which was very damaging for her. Maybe we tend to forget how damaging it was looking back. So I think it seems like a constant patch-up job for her on her reputation. It's difficult if you're casting yourself as a political pundit. I think all former first ministers and prime ministers do struggle actually with what you do. With former prime ministers, they're all usually on the after dinner speaking circuit or conferences. Boris Johnson was pointing out in his column in the Daily Mail that there's so many living former prime ministers now that they're running out of room and memorial services, and the same planes together, going to the same conferences, earning lots of money, talking about economics and so. So for her, I think it will be harder. It's harder to do that kind of thing because everyone will be asking her, at least in the short term, about this. And I think she will find it. She'll find it very, very difficult. I think anyone would, but someone. Sure, she won't get much public sympathy either. I think a lot of people will feel a bit gaslit by the way that she operated over the years and minimised what was and told everyone there's no problem with the party finances, and you're imagining it or you're saying it because you're a political enemy, which is a favourite tactic of the SNP, that it's a unionist smear operation. We heard that many times, and we're still seeing it now on social media with some nationalist supporters
Yeah.
trying to make it, but it's been blown out of proportion, and actually there are far worse scandals down south, Cuban scandals and Brexit and all that. So there's a lot of whataboutery going on for sure.
Yeah, there are. I mean, yes, you only have to look at certain social media platforms to see what happens when you put any form of opinion out on that. But hey, that's the nature of the beast. So, looking at all of that, and it wasn't great timing, was it, yesterday to have this vote around the Section 30 order? What happened with all of that yesterday, and what next for the whole idea of Scottish independence? Because the UK government ain't having none of it.
It was very symbolic, wasn't it? It was the Parliament passed John Swinney's bid to get control of a referendum. They are dependent upon UK government consent, which they would hate to hear that word being used, but it's true. Permission from them to hold a referendum. So Nicola Sturgeon went to the Supreme Court. This is another nail in her coffin, really, wasn't it? That she went to the Supreme Court to try and prove that Holyrood did have the legal power, the legal remit to unilaterally hold a referendum. It didn't work. So it's trapped John Swinney in a cul-de-sac, really. He just has to keep asking, knocking on the door of the UK government. So with the Greens' support, there is this nominal, what they call a pro-independence majority. And immediately the UK government came back and said, no, we're not going to do that. So the door was slammed, firmly shut in his face. And there were some entertaining exchanges between Russell Finlay and John Swinney and Jackie Baillie, the deputy leader of Scottish Labour, about the optics of all this, that he's talking about security and financial security that would be offered by independence. Meanwhile, so long had admitted a massive fraud period of time, but there doesn't seem to be any sense of irony on the SNP bench. I suppose Swinney was locked into this. He said he would do it. He had to do it. The timing for him
It was
was
appalling.
pretty bad. It was pretty bad. Although I guess the fact that the Murrell hearing was put off, the Murrell hearing was meant to happen before the election and was put off. And I think the election campaign would have been very different during it, for sure. Re-energised the campaign and changed the tenor of the political debate. Whether it would have changed the result is a different matter.
You're right, though. It would have. They're fortunate that never happened, because we will never know whether that would change the result, as you say. But it would have changed the tenure of it completely.
Definitely. I did speak to John Curtis, who's the great polling guru, about this, and he said he thought it was unlikely that it would have changed the result. Interestingly, with Sturgeon, that did seem to change poll ratings. When she was arrested, obviously she didn't face any charges, but that did seem to influence it. Not so much with Murrell, I guess, not being really a public figure at all, I think you could argue. Certainly not someone who sought out the limelight. Maybe there wasn't just that kind of cut through, but for sure it would have dominated the campaign. We did have the sex case involving John Linden, who was the former leader of North Lanarkshire Council at the very start of the campaign, to have that and Murrell would have been very challenging, I think. He was lucky on that front, very unlucky with the timing of this week's Indy Ref 2 relaunch. No one can take it seriously, and I suppose even from a fundraising point of view, it's very difficult now for the SNP.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem, though, isn't it? So where do they go from here? And what next for John Swinney? These questions around governance of the party, and finance, do they continue, and for how long? And also when it comes to trust from donors and party members, that has been damaged. How do they recoup that and still keep the ball rolling in terms of trying to get Scottish independence, but also to fund themselves appropriately and to gain the support? Just going back to what you said previously about this collective betrayal, it's also the people within Scotland who've been governed by the SNP.
Yes, I think it's shone a light onto party funding in general, on the whole system. We've had the row recently about Nigel Farage getting what he claimed was a gift of £5 million from a friend, which I think he said was used for security, for his own personal security, partly, and he felt he didn't need to do. Well, that's another interesting issue, and I think, to me, it throws up the question of who guards the guards. If you've got someone like Peter Murrell who had great power, great executive power, but were there any checks and balances in place? There were, but they didn't seem to work at the auditing process. He took people in. He was a con man, so he was very effective at doing that. But it does throw up that question. How but it is a problem for every political party, raising funds in a transparent way and trying to be accountable. Maybe it's time for a proper look. The idea of taxpayer funding is never particularly popular. So it's shone a light onto that. I think it's definitely reputationally damaging for the SNP, and I think they will face real problems. The fundraising drive of the kind of 2017 or 2018, which raised huge sums at the peak of Sturgeon's power, I guess, kind of in a heyday. That kind of thing can't happen again. I don't, not for a very long time. It was very successful, and this whole thing started in 2020 when the police looked at allegations of crowd-funded donations had gone missing, or at least it wasn't clear how they'd been spent or where they'd been spent, although now we know, unfortunately, where at least some of it was, where some of it went. I don't think the SNP gets out of this unscathed, for sure. Swinney is very keen to draw a line under it and move on and say, well, it was done and dusted now. It was one man's greed. He's admitted it, and that's it. Nothing to do with that. Clearly, there were institutional failures, weren't there? The checks and balances did not work at all for a very long period of time. So I think it leaves them in great difficulty, and also fuels wider disillusionment with politics.
Yeah, completely. Well, I think the story's just going to rumble on and on for quite some time. Graham, great to get your insights. Thanks very much for joining us.